Will the year 2025 be decisive for the Russian-Ukrainian war and, possibly, for the entire geopolitics of a global scale? And what does Donald Trump, who will be one of the main rule makers of this game, want? Perhaps, the annexation of other territories or, conversely, the return of the territories illegally annexed by dictators to those who deserve them. We are talking about all this right now live on Tuba on the 24th channel. I am Iryna Uzlova, and with us is Yuriy Rashkin, a public politician from the United States, as well as a deputy of the District Assembly of Rock County, Wisconsin. Yuriy Epstein, executive director of the non-profit organization Renew Democracy Initiative. Friends, hello, I am sincerely glad to see you. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Hello.
Thank you for taking the time. I don't know if Donald Trump will find time to make Canada the 51st state, and even look at Greenland and other, perhaps, some neighbors, but the Washington Post writes that in fact, Trump, at least not directly through his mouth, but his team is explaining his contradictory statements about Greenland, Canada and other neighbors to the topics that all this is put into the framework of countering the Russian Federation and China. Trump's primary mission is to counter the two, and it is a common thread that unites his comments on Canada, Mexico, Greenland, and Panama. It's not just frightening, there's whole connective tissue in it all. Trump knows what levers to push and what obstacles he has the power to use those levers, an unnamed official told the Washington Post. Yuriy, we know that you are in Canada now. What's there? Do you really feel Donald Trump's goal, to make Canada the 51st state or to counteract China directly from there, the Russian Federation? What is the mood in Canada itself? Are they afraid there?
You know, in Canada, people continue to live their lives, they go shopping, they enjoy life, now it's holidays. But as Whoopi Goldberg said on The View, celebrate now, because after the holidays it will start. So the Canadians are resting now, and yes, it's nice to come here, see what our neighbors are doing upstairs, how they look at everything that's going on in the United States, kind of stick their own head out of the sand and see what's going on outside. Now we can understand what Donald Trump wants, what his call is aimed at. You don't have to be such a Trump-Steiner, Trump's translator, to understand that from his point of view, the carving of the world, the division of the world, is now beginning, which means that it is necessary to understand this situation, and America cannot be in the last line, when everything has already been sorted out, and America stands as if spat on and is waiting for someone to give Greenland. Therefore, it is urgent now, friends, to get involved in order to build now. Apparently, the time has come for empires, because the powers that be will build, increase their gardens and vegetable gardens. I must admit that the Americans are much less impressed by this idea than, it seems to me, the Russians, who, with their joy about Crimea, bought Putin perhaps 5 years of popularity. In the United States, if we annex Greenland, it is difficult for me to imagine that we would have a complete frenzy about this, that Greenland is finally ours. Because in the United States, we can't even annex Puerto Rico completely, because it's money, it's costs, it's an unpredictable policy. This is such a strange approach for democracy, to see, oh, now we will acquire more territories. This is how empires behave, but under Donald Trump, the national interests of the United States will probably not be what many thought they are.
Uriel, do you think this is also some kind of manifestation of imperialist ambitions or really some kind of beginning of opposition to Chinese interests, because they are also present there, of course, in the territories announced by Trump?
No, I don't think it's such a strong strategy to fight against China. In reality, I apologize, we will discuss this later. I think that the whole issue of fighting China is completely different. These are all many who, as I see it, believe that Trump will fight very hard against China. I do not agree with them. I think on the contrary, we will soon see Trump and Xi Jinping as close friends as Trump and Kim Jong-un. But the question is, what about Canada, what about Greenland and so on? I will tell you the following story. During Trump's first term, one of my fairly close friends worked at the State Department. and he told me how Trump spoke out for the first time and said that he wanted to buy Greenland. This was the first time he said it, so jokingly, maybe no one, in general, reacted. But then he said a second time on Twitter that he wants to buy Greenland and put the picture on Twitter, where there is a Trump International Hotel in Greenland. So, the funny part of this story, this is despite the fact that it was absolutely unrealistic, no one seriously thought of anything about it, but because the President of the United States spoke out like that and spoke out on Twitter, then the whole team in the State Department had to spend 3 full days doing research and organizing reporting. How much it would cost. What it would be. What that would mean buying Greenland. What does this mean? What does it look like? What are the economic issues? And so on. And, of course, nothing could have happened, because they would never have agreed to sell. Moreover, forgive me, you do not carry the country's foreign policy. But despite this, due to the fact that Trump was the President of the United States, a whole team in the State Department who get a salary, it's not free, they had to organize these studies and make a presentation to higher people in the administration. I think that this time it will be more or less similar. Despite the fact that Trump, and the future members of his cabinet, and those around him, they, firstly, are more loyal. And secondly, they know better how the administration of the American government works. Despite this, I think that all this is nonsense. Nothing will happen to Greenland. And with Canada, yes, there will be a struggle with Canada about tariffs, about such things. But will Canada be the 51st state? Of course not. This is all a conversation in favor of the poor. And I think that we should focus not on this, but on the question of how Trump will counter against China. Will it confront China? How will he resist against Russia, if he does? These are the key questions, I think. And what will he do? Will he do with Canada, with Greenland and so on? These are not serious talks, I think.
I think I would like to clarify this, because it seems to me that these are all two sides of the same coin, because, as Biden says, we have a confrontation between democracy and authoritarian countries, and from this perspective, if we see Trump as a representative of authoritarian leaders, then now, of course, an authoritarian leader against democracy. Accordingly, the United States should be against the democracy of Canada, Denmark, the European Union, Ukraine. Show democracy, we are against. They have been greeding on us for too long, apparently, and now we will give them tariffs where they're hurt. But you know what amazes me about Canada? Because I've been here quite a few times, and every time you think, wow, how easy it is to cross the border. He showed people his passport, said that you went to visit friends and would return in a few days, come in, leave as much as you want. Plus the whole country with a 30% discount. Because the dollar is lower here, we have such a powerful American dollar, so the whole country is on sale here, go here to shop, it's just a dream, and they are happy about it. And suddenly, with this one statement about tariffs, our future president managed to worsen relations with our closest neighbor. To worsen relations, that now they can have a state and power, the government can now change, fall apart, early elections, because of Trump's policy on Canada. Since when have we, as America, been converging with Canada at all? This is because, yes, the conversation is not about Canada becoming the 51st state, at least not under this Trump cadence. But the fact that it is possible to spoil relations with countries with which there have always been good relations, this is a reality.
And here I agree. The most important risk here is to spoil relations with our allies, spoil relations with Canada, with the European Union, and so on, so on. And so, a key task in the next 4 years is to try to work with different levers of power in the United States to stop this. And even among the Republicans, there are those who still understand the importance of our allies. Let me remind you that a few years ago, Congress voted that the President of the United States has no right to pull America out of NATO without Congress agreeing with him. And not only the Democrats, but also the Republicans voted for this. And this means that this will be our task. It's working with those in the Republican Party to try to stop this administration, not to allow this administration to get too close to dictators, to distance ourselves too much between us and our allies, and try to change their actions, and I think it's possible. I will give one more example related to Ukraine, where during Trump's first term, Congress voted what Ukraine is entitled to, I think, for $500 million of weapons. Trump refused to give you these weapons and tried to use these weapons to blackmail Zelensky so that Zelensky would give him dirt about Biden. But what happened? As soon as it came out to the public, thank you, I say, to one of our directors, Alexander Vindman, who spoke publicly and said, he was on the call, and that's what happened. When it all came out publicly, Trump had no other choice. He was forced to give you these weapons. And this means that there are opportunities for a push. Not to mention force. But it is as if to almost force this administration to do what needs to be done. We should not just raise our hands and say, that's it, Trump, the American president who will work with dictators. No, after all, there are opportunities to influence it and still move America in the right direction.
Yuri, do you also see opportunities to influence Trump and the fact that Trump, in turn, will then influence dictators like Putin?
To be honest, I am more counting on what we are already seeing. When there is a split between Elon Musk and Steve Bannon, and when, inside the castle, these revolutionaries, who first rallied together to get rid of their main threat, the democratic state, now making their way inside, they begin to quarrel. Now, having made their way inside, they begin to quarrel. And I think I count on their quarrels more. That their quarrels are more than institutional pressure, because institutional pressure has to be constantly going on. It will slow down the kind of collapse that the next administrations will try to bring about just by looking at who they appoint. They appoint people who will fight their ministries. So, yes, I agree that a very key role here is what Republican politicians, even Republican senators, and congressmen will do, because they will play a key role. And it seems to me that fundamental understanding is very important here. This, it seems to me, is what can be used to find the basis for an agreed agreement. This is a threat to Russia. Because it seems to me that both Republican politicians and Democratic politicians, all of them, except for the Trumpists for some reason, understand very clearly that this is a threat to Russia, coming from Russia. It seems to me that this is how it is possible to build some coalitions, understanding that real progress will occur due to the collapse within these revolutionary troops.
Uriel, we have already said that we will talk about this later and that all this, in principle, is invested in the solution of one issue of both the Russian Federation and China, and the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war. At least, this is also what our political scientist Vladimir Denisenko says. He believes that the issue of the Russian Federation and Ukraine will be proxy issues for Trump, who will invest everything in this such a bilateral struggle between the United States and China. Will it really be possible in this form? Or will the same mission of Kit Kellogg, which is originally scheduled for January, the same promises of Trump to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours, begin with them in January, and then, as they say, we will see?
I think it will be seen. Of course, we will need to discuss the war in Ukraine from the point of view of China, just then. We need to show that if you want to stand up to China, then it is Ukraine that must win. That it is in our interests against China, not only against Russia, but also against China, for Ukraine to win. Because Russia is China's closest friend, and if Russia wins, then this will increase the risk several times that China represents. The threat that China poses not only to the entire free world, but specifically to Taiwan. And if we are ready to defend Taiwan after all, then there could be a clash between China and the United States. And this will be a huge risk to the whole world. Of course, here again this presents a new question, but will the Trump administration be ready to defend Taiwan? Here again, we don't quite know this. So, despite the fact that Trump speaks out and says that everything he tries to do, everything he says about Panama, about Canada and so on, he is preparing to fight against China. I don't know how much I see that he is actually ready to fight against China. I will remind the audience that a few days ago, Trump's company, his transition team, wrote to the U.S. Supreme Court what they think, that TikTok should not be banned. That only Trump, such a genius as he is, will be able to come up with a deal between TikTok and the American government where everyone will be fine. I'll remind people that Trump has almost 15 million followers on TikTok, and at the same time, I will remind you that TikTok is part of Chinese intelligence. And this not only means that China can take some information about American citizens from TikTok, but that also means that China can promote disinformation on TikTok and influence the American people. And this is such a big risk. And Trump, despite this, and despite the fact that a few years ago he himself tried to ban TikTok, now he is against banning TikTok. So, again, I see a few things here who disturb me very much and show me that Trump is not really ready to confront China. And our job is to push it, to almost force him to do what he himself says. What he wants to do is confront China, advance American interests, fight dictators. And I don't know, this will be our key task. And it will be necessary to use his words, his own words, to promote this goal among Republicans and among the future Trump administration.
The Financial Times analyzes 5 possible different internal and external scenarios that should be expected during the cadence of the new second Donald Trump. At the same time, as John Ikenberry of Princeton University says, Trump, who is willing to challenge almost every element of the liberal international order, trade, alliances, migration, multilateralism, solidarity between democracy, human rights, everything. One of them, still a possible scenario, is that, perhaps, a deal between the states of the Russian Federation and China, which will allow them to leave their sphere of influence, and Trump himself will focus on his dominance in his region. Do you think such a scenario is possible?
I think that this is what we are moving towards, and the only question here is to what extent these plans will be implemented. Because, having looked at the requirements and desires of China with TikTok, this is a wonderful example of how Trump has already sold Ukraine to Putin, and now sells Americans to China. Because it means that he wants to get a deal where everyone is happy, and if he didn't get involved, then everyone would be happy and all this would be done. It means that he is dissatisfied. This means that any deal is not final as long as Trump is not happy. And when Trump is satisfied, when he, apparently, gets something for it. I don't know if it's called Trump TikTok or if Trump will just somehow have something out of it. But this is part of the rip-off of the state, which is now just moving towards such, not so much legalized, but normalized corruption. When it can be said that the owner of the Chinese TikTok Dan can make an incredible donation to the election campaign. Buy Trump Tower, and then Trump is happy, and everyone, therefore, is happy, and the deal can move forward, and then there is no need to ban TikTok. And the fact that TikTok as a result, of course, receives all the information about the Americans, was not part of the purpose of the deal at all. And again, Elon Musk has big interests with China. Therefore, to imagine that our shadow grey cardinal will be able to quarrel with a large manufacturer of Tesla and so on, also looks kind of unreasonable. So, most likely, they will find a common language. And on the other hand, An article has now been published that China is now helping Russia with the production of drones at an increased level. And this is the study of War Institute, this was written in the CNN investigation. That is, we see how our media institutions are actually working to convey to us the information that China continues to intensively help Russia now. So what? And what are we going to do about it? I would probably even think that politicians, of course, are interested in the threat to Russia, but I think the loss of their own power and influence is also important. And the more they retreat before Trump, the more they depend on him, the more they lose their own power. And so another reason why we see politicians opposing Trump is because they don't want to lose their influence, not to give their power and decision to this person, but to try to depend on someone else. Sometimes it's like, say, in Utah, when a new senator is not dependent on Trump, he depends on the Mormon church, because they are kind of in charge there, they elected him. But he's also a Republican, because there are no others in Utah. Therefore, this is such an interesting moment when you can assemble such coalitions, when people, again, hope to hold on to their own power, not to give it to Trump, but to hold on themselves. But at this point, China is just an example of a strong dictator, an imperialist, with whom Trump is easily able to find a common language. Therefore, again, it is difficult to imagine that we are going to some kind of conflict with China. The only thing that can be imagined is a historical version, when even the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement on the division of the world, with a secret division of the world, is just as similar. And in the end, Hitler treacherously attacked. Therefore, who is treacherous here? Which dictator will covet whom? Whose empire will be the first, and who will be the population of the country and the planet? This is an open question, but things are just moving according to this scenario, and perhaps we will see a confrontation with China simply not because we suspected that China was coveting, I don't know, Greenland or something else. We'll see. But I think that it will now be very difficult for Taiwan to count on American assistance in principle.
Uriel, we have repeatedly remembered Elon Musk, his influence, his interests in China and everywhere today. And for some reason, it seems to me that this tandem of shadow and explicit Musk and Trump, it may not last long at all. Trump's team says that Musk has neither presidential ambitions nor ambitions to pull the entire blanket of power over himself, but it seems that the situation may look the other way around. Today it is not, but tomorrow it will appear, which will clearly not please Donald Trump. Or will the team that is now being formed of a completely diverse variety be a fairly stable association?
No, I think we can remember Donald Trump's first term. His team is never steadfast. The team will change day by day, week by week. In this sense, I absolutely agree with Yuriy. That one of our hopes. I think what we can hope for. This is something that Trump and Elon Musk can fight. It's possible, it's absolutely possible. These are two people who have a huge ego. And I think it's almost inevitable that they will fight someday. We have already seen how it begins. Now I have questions about visas to the United States. The H-1B visa is the visa that businesses use. People take an H-1B visa to go to work for an organization like mine, for example. And Elon Musk spoke in favor of this program, and many Trumpists, of course, opposed it. Steve Bannon is included in it, as Yuriy said. And then Elon Musk spoke out and said that some Trumpists, some human magicians, that they are absolutely idiots and it's terrible there. This means that we already see how they begin to quarrel with each other. And so I think that we can still hope for this a little. But from another point of view, we have to be very careful about it. Because I recently spoke with Garry Kasparov on this topic. Just that Elon Musk is the first real American oligarch. That we have never had this in our history. People do not understand what an oligarch is. People think that just a rich person is automatically an oligarch. But forgive me, no. And they say, a rich person, people can influence the government. Of course, they can influence the government. If you're rich enough, you're a billionaire, you can influence the government. But this is not the same as an oligarch. An oligarch is a person who can not only influence the government, but one who receives some part of his money from the government. One that absolutely interferes with its business interests and political interests, so that they could not even distinguish one from the other. And from this point of view, Elon Musk is the first such American oligarch. And all these interests of Tesla, SpaceX and so on, yes, they are all related to the American government, and of course American policy can move in that direction to help Elon Musk's businesses. This is the first time we've seen the Trump administration oppose the Rivian deal, and Rivian is a different company, it's a competitor to Tesla. And to date, the Biden administration has promised a big loan Rivian, and now the Trump administration is saying that when they come to power, they will try to stop it. But why do they do it? Because they are simply not interested in politicians. It's possible. Or maybe they're only doing it because Elon Musk asked them to do it, because Rivian is a competitor to Tesla. And we see the same issues with China. Elon Musk cannot contradict China. His number 2 is the largest factory in Tesla, and they're in SpaceX and so on. They are in China. So he cannot oppose China. Moreover, China is the most important manufacturer in the world in lithium. Lithium is the most important element in the electric motors of machines. Motors of electric machines. And this means that if Elon Musk stands up to China, he may lose it all. And this again means that we must now think. The US government is doing one or the other because it's in our geopolitical interest or because it's in Elon Musk's business interest. And this means that now, as a people, we must be very careful about this. And we must do all we can to be the first to show these conflicts of interest, to prove to the public that these conflicts exist, and then try to stop them somehow, try to delay somehow, and so on. And the last thing I'll say, this is what a few years ago, I believe that the Democrats grossly mistaken in the sense that they did not try to take Elon Musk to them. Elon Musk does not have a real political ideology, we see it. He believes and says what people who love him say and believe. And 3 to 4 years ago it was obvious that the Democrats for some reason abandoned Elon Musk, they insulted him. They excluded him from some important meeting in the White House. And the Republicans began to hug and show him how much they love him, and so on. And thanks to this, Elon Musk became an extreme, a right-wing Republican. Or it would be possible to do absolutely the opposite. I am not saying here that this would be such a principle. This is not a question of principles, but a question of practice. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. He was the richest man in the world a few years ago, and the Democrats had the opportunity to seduce him, and they made a choice. They chose the opposite, not to seduce him, but to deny him.
Look, Uriel, I don't agree with you here, because when we look at the Republican Party of today, its leaders are the parties of the outcasts. This is a party of people who are accused of sexual harassment, of various things, who lost the elections and were appointed to different positions. This is the party of the outcasts. And in this sense, when Elon Musk was rejected by the Democrats, he, of course, felt at home, probably, with such Republicans. This is a kind of party of people who go against it, a party of outcasts. Therefore, it would be difficult for him in such a situation in today's Democratic Party, which requires such pure moral crystallization. Of course, we already see that now the remnants of ours, already leaving the Biden administration, are going to investigate Musk for potential violations regarding contracts, disclosure of information, and so on. That is, in principle, he could not be a Democrat. I think that it is impossible for the Democrats to turn a blind eye and say, okay, it doesn't matter what he is, but he is the richest. It would be a betrayal of democratic principles. Therefore, if they went to defeat in this way, they were going to lose, but to do so by breaking their own rules would be no less a defeat in this sense. Like Biden now, who pardoned his own son. Yes, He did, but he lost a lot of authority in the Democratic Party in this way, so to say, you know, we're going to turn a blind eye to Musk, would be a big problem for the Democrats. And on the other hand, Uriel, it seems to me that you have very nicely outlined the limits of Elon Musk's power, because he is really an oligarch, such as we did not have in the United States. But when we say that perhaps he is the ruler of the world, absolutely not, because he ends with China, because he needs to follow, apparently, China's demands, so that he does not lose his lithium reserves, so that he can do what he needs. Accordingly, it means that he is not yet a Chinese oligarch. He is only an American oligarch. Interesting.
I don't remember what year it was. It was either in 2022 or in 2021. There was a conference in the White House related to cars and so on. They invited all the most important auto companies to the United States. Except for one thing. Elon Musk. And they didn't expel him because he was this or that. Because in those days he was still more or less normal. That was before he started speaking out and saying all these crazy things. At that moment, he was expelled because there was some kind of struggle with one of his factories, in a few, perhaps, of his factories around the auto unions.
Trade unions.
Yes. What did you say? Auto unions?
Trade union.
Trade unions, thank you. Trade unions. And I think it was the stupidest mistake, the worst mistake the Democrats could make. Exclude Elon Musk from this conference just because. That he had conflicts with trade unions in his factories. That happened everywhere. This is often. And the Democrats were grossly mistaken in deciding that they only had to look after the interests of these unions.
You're right, because on the one hand, they decided, they elected the union instead of Elon Musk, and then the unions elected Trump.
Exactly. Teamsters, one of the most important unions in the United States, has come out aggressively in support of Trump. Recently, their director was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And the Democrats were just so wrong here. I don't understand how the Democrats elect. That they will support the interests of some specific small groups. Instead of supporting those interests of the majority of Americans and looking at such issues practically. I don't like Elon Musk. Yes, it's public. You can Google my name. You can Google my organization Renew Democracy Initiative. And you will see that we have publicly fought Elon Musk several times, and I will even remind people that he aggressively attacked us, and this is the first time in my life that I had experienced anti-Semitism online that I had never seen in my life. When Elon Musk went against us, a few of his endorsements went to our website and took a screenshot and drew Mogain David next to each of my colleagues and members of my board of directors who is Jewish. It's even a funny story here, because I found out that one of my directors was Jewish. I didn't know she was Jewish. Her name is Linda Shaves. I had no idea she was Jewish. That's where someone drew this Mogain David next to her name. I call her later. I say, Linda, are you Jewish? I didn't even know. People who support him. But despite all this, despite the fact that I experienced it, despite the fact that all this happened, I am a pragmatist. And in this sense, I believe that the Democrats were grossly mistaken, that they rejected such a person who could be for them, even if he could not be such an important ally. We see that he can be a very important enemy. And they made an enemy out of him.
We are also moving on to the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war in the near future. Our People's Deputy of Ukraine, who is also the head of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Foreign Policy of Interparliamentary Cooperation, Alexander Mereshko, went to the United States of America and says that he returned back in a more optimistic mood than he went there. Not so long ago, Mr. Mereshko returned from Washington. He had a lot of meetings within the framework of United for Ukraine, uniting for the sake of Ukraine, and he says that it seems that either this peace plan from Trump is already ready, or is nearing its completion. And according to his observations, the transition of power to the new administration has begun. There is less aggressive rhetoric. A more constructive approach to Ukraine is emerging. Trump realized that it was unrealistic to resolve the issue in 24 hours, and in no case should he make concessions to Putin, and it was impossible to resolve the issue of peace at the expense of territorial concessions to Ukraine. Did Trump understand for sure that it is impossible to make concessions to Putin and it is impossible to resolve the issue at the expense of the interests of Ukraine? And to what extent this understanding that it will not work in 24 hours will not be able to completely turn Trump away from help or turn it into a long-term conflict either here or there? What do you see here in the near future?
I think that you have a better understanding of what is happening in Washington and what exactly the politicians with whom the Ukrainian deputy met could say. But it seems to me that since the elections are now over, the degree of rhetoric has in a sense dropped very much. Needless to say, they're horrible villains. Because the elections are over, now we need to work. But there is a big difference between rhetoric and action. And simply because now in politics in Washington it is possible, why not? Even Republicans say calmer and more measured things about Ukraine. This does not mean that they will vote to help Ukraine, and this is what Biden always says. Don't tell me what is important to you, show me your budget. And until Trump shows a budget in which he supports at least some assistance to Ukraine, it is difficult for me to imagine all this, except for pleasant assurances, which, remember, we discussed with you, to dispel the seeding. What's the point of the trip? Will you dispel the sowing? Okay, the man went and dispelled his own fears and perhaps other people's, but the lowered degree of rhetoric does not mean that we are waiting for some kind of friendlier policy. We will just say nicer things now, then Trump will come to power, and then we will figure it out. Because at this moment, if an active rollback from helping Ukraine begins, then what difference does it make what some congressman or senator said? He, she, tried. They still support the heroic Ukrainian people, but now the ship has turned and we will wave to you everything, say goodbye to support and good luck, or maybe not. But I hope that now, it seems to me that it is very important, and again, interesting, Uriel's opinion, that there are more Ukrainians in Washington, that more representatives of the Ukrainian authorities are in Washington. I know that Timothy Snyder said that it is strange that we have such a close relationship with Ukraine, which we now support so much, and there are so few Americans in Ukraine. So when I went there, I felt like I understood what Timothy Snyder was talking about. That's how important it is now, not just cultural support, because under Biden it was important to have cultural troops from Ukraine, fighters in the United States, to thank for the support, and so on. And now it's different. Now you need to be inside the palace, because palace intrigues begin, and you need to be inside there as much as possible, while these bridges are there, while they are not burned, but nevertheless, after January 20th, we should expect that regardless of the rhetoric, it can change very seriously, because there will be no need to play what is happening now. What is happening now, when Putin is threatening with this Oreshnik, then something else, because you need to hold out until January 20th, so that Biden does not somehow play, does not confuse the cards. And if everything goes the way it is, then Kellogg now, Kellogg there, it doesn't matter. The main thing is to hold out for a few more days, stand for 3 weeks, and there will be Trump in power, and Putin, yes, it will be necessary to think about what is happening in Georgia, what is happening in the spheres of influence around, how much Ukraine has exhausted Russia's ability to be a threat to everyone else now, and how much Russia will be the kind of zombie that will act. This is Korean cannon fodder, Chinese weapons, and the Russian flag. This means that this is how it will work. Therefore, now there will be a confrontation, of course, and gratitude from the whole world to the Ukrainian people, who are resisting this aggression, which, it seems to me, has very seriously depleted Russia's capabilities. If we now got another 4 years of democratic administration, then I have no doubt that Ukraine would have won during this time. Simply because Russia, it seems to me, is on the verge of collapse due to the fact that North Korean soldiers and Chinese weapons all confirm that Russia is weak. But now Russia can get very strong support at a time when it is already needed. I just remember the Brest-Litovsk peace, which was concluded by Agent Lenin with Germany, but still did not save Germany from defeat in the First World War.
Uriel, to what extent will our presence, our work with the new administration really be important to the Ukrainian side? As Yuriy says, to what extent will this win the Trump administration, and to what extent will Putin's weakness and ultimatums turn such Trump and his entourage away from the Russian Federation?
So, I will start by saying that I do not think that all this would be better if the Democrats were in power for another term, but I do not agree with Yuriy that Ukraine would definitely be able to win and not only keep Russia, but also return the territory and so on. Because we see that it was Biden who very often said beautiful, good, sweet words, and then did very little. And the support that the Democrats gave Ukraine was not even close enough for Ukraine to win. They gave only what had to be given so that Ukraine would not lose. The three of us have discussed this very often.
Let me remind you that these are the words that have always been spoken. The goal was to raise the price for Russia so much that Russia felt that the price was too high. It seems to me that the price is very high now.
The price is high, but we must not forget that there are also problems in Ukraine. And this goes without saying. I react so negatively to people like Jake Sullivan and so on, because they say it is necessary to increase this price and so on. But for some reason they do not think about what the price is for Ukraine. And here is the price for Ukraine. We often say in America, Ukraine is holding back Russia, Ukraine is fighting and defending the entire free world. But Iryna, do you see how many people died in the country itself? How many died? And how many continue to die? And how much do you lose? The price is so high for you. And this is such a high price because of us. Because we haven't given you enough. We have only given you enough to raise the price for Russia. We did not give you what you would need to win. And this means that if the Democrats had come to power, yes, there would have been, maybe the status quo would have remained, you would not have lost, there would have been no risk that Russia could simply take everything. That risk exists under Trump, but the situation would be, I don't think just all, a guarantee that you would win. But now I want to say the second point, that now we do not live in that world. The Democrats will not return to power, on the contrary, the Republicans control all the levers of power. That means we have to work with them. This means that Ukraine should not only have more representatives of Washington. Frankly, you should have other representatives in Washington today. I just know your embassy well, I know your embassy well, how Ukraine works in Washington, and today your relations with the Republicans are problematic. Mike Johnson spoke publicly against your ambassador in Washington and he said that he believes that Zelensky should immediately return her to Kiev. And again, I'm not saying whether I agree with them or not. My opinion, to be honest, is absolutely not important. The only important thing is that you have to be able to work with Republicans. And since the situation is located in Washington today, I don't think that Ukraine is in a good position to work, to cooperate with the Republicans, because you have few people who have a good relationship with the Republicans. So I think you have to find other representatives who have something to do with those. Like Mike Johnson, with the likes of Kellogg and so on, who could come to Washington and promote productive cooperation with such people. Here I will give an example, such as Pinchuk. Despite the fact that he is absolutely not a diplomat, he is a businessman and so on, but he has a relationship with the Republicans. And others, like him, they can influence Trump. They can use the same language that Trump himself uses to promote productive cooperation. And here, I think, there is simply nothing more important now than that Ukraine finds a reason to cooperate productively with Trump. And that means you have to find people who have that relationship with Republicans. And my last point, that you still have to find examples. How to talk to them correctly. And what are the most influential subjects among Republicans? I will give an example that when Mike Johnson finally decided to support aid to Ukraine, he did it because people were able to convince. that Ukraine protects Christians, and Russia is just torturing them.
We discussed this narrative. And I told you the same thing last time, that it is possible simply because that Trump didn't want this aid to go through. While he is not in power, he wanted it to happen under him, but these are two parts.
Yes, we discussed it, the ones I talk to, who work in Congress, who understand this. They tell me that this is one of the most important narratives. It was a narrative of religion. Were there other narratives there? Were other arguments connected?
I will tell you that in such a situation, I agree, when a person has made a decision, he needs to justify it on something. And in that sense, the argument of religion is absolutely correct, because it's the argument that MAGA is happy with, that suits everybody because it's connected, and because you've chosen the right argument. But it seems to me that this was secondary to Trump's initial wishes. But, nevertheless, it is probably also important to have such arguments, so that when a decision is made, they can be substantiated.
I think that Kai is still important to have. I will say that it is not me alone, not Audia, not only we think so. These are other pro-Ukrainian organizations, such as Razum and so on. They also believe, like us, that such arguments, such narratives were key to convince Mike Johnson and other Republicans to support aid to Ukraine. And today I believe that it is necessary to promote this narrative, and the narrative around China, and the narrative around business, that after the war there will be an opportunity to invest billions of dollars in Ukraine and earn very well there. And this is exactly what we need to use these narratives, because Republicans understand these arguments. And so I think here we are, this is what we're doing here right now, this should be one of our most important goals, to promote these arguments and come up with other arguments that we can use to positively influence the Trump administration.
Yes, I'm just thinking about what an ambassador from Ukraine should look like, in Trump's opinion. It should probably be some kind of very cinematic character, so you look there to see who you have like whom. But now we're also being selected for roles according to completely different parameters.
Friends, thank you very much for today's conversation. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your constructive comments. Take care, see you soon. Goodbye. Iryna Uzlova was with you, and Yuriy Rashkin, a U.S. political activist and Rock County District Assembly member, and Uriel Epstein, Executive Director of Renew Democracy Initiative, were with me. Friends, thank you for spending this evening with us. Thank you for your comments, put likes. Take care of yourself, trust the armed force of Ukraine, see you and win.